G'day guys, Dean here from Blog for the Blood God, and I've just come back from the Risky Rollers Grand Tournament, where I went undefeated running my Creations of Bile list, and I took first place for that event. Really excited and really happy with my results. So what I wanted to do was come back, share those results with you, and do a bit of an overview of the list that I ran, the opponents that I versed, the way that the list performed in those games, as well as a general overview of the event itself. So this is going to be quite a long video, longer than some of my other ones, because I'm going to break down every single element in as much detail as I can remember to try to provide you guys with as much insight into how I was able to achieve these results. And so what I'm going to do to try and make it a little bit easier for you to manage when you're watching this is I'm going to break it down into a series of different chapters, so you'll be able to skip ahead to specific parts that interest you, or if you are watching it, you can watch it in segments and things like that, and you'll be able to go, okay, cool, I'm at the end of that segment, I'll put it away for tonight and I'll watch the rest tomorrow, that sort of thing. So hopefully that makes it a little bit easier for you to watch, and hopefully this content is something that you guys are interested in, because I'm really happy with these results and I want to share them with you. My goal on this channel is to make you a better Chaos Space Marine player, or if you're not a Chaos Space Marine player, my goal is to spill the beans and tell you what Chaos Space Marines do, so that when you come up across them on the table, you don't get destroyed by surprise gotcha moments. So basically we're going to deep dive Chaos Space Marines together, and part of that deep dive is going through my results from my tournaments. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Alrighty, so like I said at the start, I'm going to be breaking this video down into a series of chapters. So let's go through those chapters now, so that if you get impatient and you want to skip forward ahead, you'll know exactly which chapters are which and at what order the video is going to be presented in. So chapter 1 is going to be the event format and review. Chapter 2 will be my list. Chapter 3 will be round 1. Chapter 4 will be round 2. Chapter 5 will be round 3. Chapter 6 will be round 4. Chapter 7 will be round 5. Chapter 8 will be a summary of the event and a summary of my games, as well as some of the changes that I'm planning to make for my list going forward. Chapter 9 will be a bit of footage from the awards ceremony, and then Chapter 10 will be an army showcase showing off some of the beautiful armies that were in attendance at this event. Alrighty, with that out of the way, let's get straight into Chapter 1, which is the tournament review. So this was a standard GT sort of ITC event. There wasn't anything particularly different about this event. However, there were a few small things that were slightly different than other events that I want to touch on, because some of them were really good and I like to see them in tournaments, and others are not. So it was, I think it ended up at about 38 players. They initially had over 40, maybe even 50 players signed up, but naturally you have some dropouts, particularly with COVID and those sorts of things. So we ended up about 38 players, 5 rounds, 2,000 points, you know, Battle Forge missions, Strike Force missions, you know, all your standard suite of secondaries, everything pretty cut and dry standard. One of the things that was different about this event is they had 2.5-hour rounds, whereas normally here in Melbourne we play 3-hour rounds, or at the very least 2 hours 45 minutes. But what the TOs did to sort of circumvent that is, in between games, the TOs would go to each table and set it up for the next mission. So when you got to the table, there was no touching the terrain, there was no setting up objective markers, they had that all set up ready for you. So basically you get to the table and you could just start the game straight away, which was a really interesting way of doing it. Often the events down here, you know, people will bring their own objective markers, and, you know, the round timer will start, you've got 3 hours in the round, but you've got to get to the table, you've got to make sure that the terrain's all set up good, you've got to make sure that the terrain's balanced, you've got to set up your objective markers, you've got to map everything out. Whereas the Risky Rollers lads, they did all of that, and they built that into the round, the gap between the rounds, and then had slightly shorter rounds to accommodate that. This was a really unique approach, and I can sort of see some of the benefits, but I can also see some of the deficits, because only having a 2.5-hour round can put a lot of time pressure on players, because that is a long time. That's not a very long time to get a lot of things done. So there were some games where I could see people were going, you know, right up to the line, and unfortunately one of my games, my opponent clocked out and ran out of time partway through the game, because only having an hour and a half or an hour and 15 minutes, it's not very good, and it makes it quite difficult for players to get the entirety of their turns done. So that was one thing that is definitely worth considering, because it did actually have an impact on the overall results of some of the games at the tournament. So let me know in the comments below what you think is a reasonable standard to expect at a tournament. I personally think 3 hours is the minimum, even though a lot of games will finish early. You know, like if you're running knights versus knights, that's not going to take 3 hours, you know? But I think with a game as complex as 40k, it's part of the responsibility of the TOs to facilitate games. That's the whole point of a TO. And I think that some lists that operate in multiple phases and do multiple things require a lot of time. Fortunately, knowing that it was only 2.5 hour rounds, I wrote a list that was pretty much just psychic and combat, and the psychic was very fast. It was just, this guy's doing all of his buffs on his own unit, done. So no decision-making process there. So my army was more or less just move and combat, and that allowed me to get through my turns really, really fast. But some of the players there were having some challenges with the round times. It's also worth noting that these TOs had every single table had an identical terrain layout. So basically what they did is they went through before the event, and I'll put some examples up on the screen now, but they basically went through and they did a set terrain map for all 9 missions, and then they released that for the players so that you had an idea of what you were sort of getting into. And then in between rounds, they would set up every single table to be identical. Now this I really, really liked, because it basically meant that there was never a situation where you feel like you got fucked by getting paired onto a dense table. You know, and you're like, I would have beaten them if there wasn't so much terrain, or, you know, I would have beaten them if there was more terrain, you know, like those sorts of situations. They've insulated themselves from that by going, here's what the terrain layout is going to look like for all 9 maps, right? And then you don't know which 5 missions we're going to play. So you don't know this exact maps that you're going to play. So you don't know the exact terrain layout. So you can't exactly tailor, but you can go into the event with a very reasonable expectation for what the terrain's going to be like. And you'll never be in one of those situations where you're playing on this table and you're looking at that table and being like, fuck, I wish I was on that table. Look at it. There's a clear gun line and, you know, shooting ranges and stuff. So having every table identical and having that information available publicly, I think was a huge win and a huge flex for these TOs, and I definitely very much appreciate it, and I'm looking to actually emulate it in my events going forward. So great job to the Risky Roller lads there. Some other little bits and pieces about the event itself. It was held at the Moorabbin Bowls Club, which is a sick venue. They had drinks, they had catered lunch on both days, plenty of space for activities. You know, there was an outside eating area, there was inside eating area, there was tons of, it was just a fantastic venue. So there was really good work there. The Risky Rollers lads put on an amazing show. So if you happen to be from Melbourne, or even if from like surrounds, like rural Victoria, I highly recommend checking out the Risky Rollers events. I'll chuck some links in the description below if you are interested, but definitely check them out. They put on a sick show. They're a bunch of mad lads. And yeah, I can't say how much I respect and love these guys. They did a great job. So huge shout out to them. And I think that more or less wraps up the summary of the tournament format and the venue and all that sort of stuff. So let's just get stuck straight into my list. Alrighty, now we're in chapter 2. So we're going to talk about my list in this part of the video. Now, I have done a previous video called the Creations of Bile Masterclass. And in that, I outlined a list that I thought was going to be a top tier tournament list. Now, I've refined it slightly since then because I made a few errors in that list video where I took more cultists than were possible, for example. So I've refined it and I've corrected those errors. And basically that's the list that I ran for this event. So if you want to really deep dive it and go through all of the stratagems and stuff, I recommend checking out that video. That video was very popular and it had a lot of information in it. However, in this video, I'm going to sort of cover some of that stuff as well, but I don't want to go into too much detail and cover too much ground that's already been covered. So definitely head back and check that out. But yeah, so basically I'll go through the list with you now, and there are some slight changes since that previous list, so it is worth going through it. So let's go through that together. So it's a Creations of Bile list, but I have a Supreme Commander detachment with Abaddon the Despoiler, the big man himself. Then I have a HQ, he's a Demon Prince. He has the Mark of Tzeentch, he has Wings, he has Twisted Regeneration and Warp Time. And then I've got a HQ, which is a Dark Apostle, he's unmarked and he has Illusory Supplication. And then we have a HQ who's a Master of Possessions with Marcus Lanesh, Liber Hereticus, Pact of Flesh, and Mutated Invigoration. Then we go into my troop slots. I basically got 3 units of 10 Chaos Cultists there for my backfields and my scoring banners and those sorts of things. In the elites, I have a unit of 6 Khorne Berserkers, a unit of 10 Terminators with 2 Heavy Flamers and 2 Chain Fists, as well as 2 models equipped with double Accursed Weapon and the Black Rune of Damnation. These are also Mark of Slaanesh. Then I have, in my other elite slots, I have 2 units of 5 Possessed. In my fast attack, I have 5 Raptors. And in my other fast attack, I have a unit of 8 Chaos Bikers with the Mark of Khorne, an Icon, and the Black Mace. Yeah, so basically the way this list was designed to function was you have the big Terminator brick with all your characters tucked in, so they can't be targeted, they're bulletproof, and the Terminators themselves are bulletproof. So they move up and take over the center of the table. Meanwhile, you've got Possessed running the flanks, you've got Warp Talons and, not Warp Talons, Raptors and Bikers hitting the opponent hard early, and then you've got the cultists screening out your backfield, doing your actions, those sorts of things. And then there's the unit of Khorne Berserkers, which is a bit of a wild card unit. Now, the idea with the Khorne Berserkers, I didn't realize this when I submitted the list, and unfortunately, by the time I made a realization, which was brought to me by someone in the comments of one of these videos, was that Khorne Berserkers actually don't get a Legion trait, which means they don't get the +1 move, they don't get the +1 strength, and they, more importantly, they don't get to fight on death. Now, I didn't realize this when I wrote the list, and it was too late. Had I known that, I would have just swapped them out for some Legionnaires with the Mark of Khorne and an Icon, and basically then they fill the same role as what the Berserkers did, but they gain all this utility, they gain objective secured, they gain the ability to fight twice, they're fucking sick. Whereas the Khorne Berserkers, they still hit hard, but it just meant I had to wield them very differently because I couldn't just throw them out and suicide them knowing that they were going to fight on death. I had to make sure that if they were in combat, they were the ones making the charge. I couldn't just take a charge. Whereas the other units, I was able to take the charge. So yeah, the Berserkers, they were a misplay. That was an error in list creation, but I was able to wield them differently, which was fine in the game. So basically, yeah, the other thing about the Cultist is a very, very important unit, and it's almost worth taking a 4th unit if you can squeeze it in, because the idea is that one of the main weaknesses of those Terminators are pretty much immune to any shooting that your opponent's going to throw at them, and they're more or less immune to any combat once they get their buffs up. But if they don't have their buffs, they're actually relatively soft, right? And a lot of the buffs that you put on them are either command phase or done in your psychic phase. So if your opponent has something like Death Company that they're able to sling in and get a turn 1 charge on you, or something like, that's able to do some kind of damage to you, significant damage to you turn 1, they can actually really punk your Terminator unit. And that's a huge problem. So what I would do with the Cultists is I would find a nice big L-shaped ruin in my deployment zone somewhere, hide the Terminators behind that, and then use the Cultists for 2 things. One was to screen out angles. So if they had like a drop pod, they wouldn't be able to drop it in somewhere that could see the Terminators because there'd be Cultists there, right? So you put them out on the flanks to make it so that they can't drop on you. Or if they have something like Death Company, what you do is you put your characters, you ring Terminators around it, and then you ring Cultists around that. And now basically what you're telling your opponent is that they can't even charge the Terminators turn 1. And you do your 2 Cultists in a horseshoe like that, with your Terminators in the middle, and that way, in your first turn, those Cultists are able to curl out like that, and your Terminators can just move without having to try to move through the Cultists or anything like that. So the Cultists were really important for that battlefield role. And there's also quite a few missions where there's a tertiary or a sub-primary where you have to be doing actions, and I often wanted to be raising banners. So having multiple units that are able to do those actions, for example, in Data Scry Salvage, you want one thing that can raise a banner on your home, but you also want another unit on there that can do the Data Scry Salvage action. So having multiple disposable units of Cultists is really powerful. And the other thing that they're really good at is, again, protecting those Terminators from things like smites or mortal wound damage. So being able to put Cultists out, and it's like, cool, if your plan is to do mortal wounds, you have to get through 10 fucking Cultists first. And because you do the psychic phase before the shooting phase, it's not like they can just go, cool, I'll just shoot your Cultists and then smite your Terminators. Well, no, your smites come first. So having those Cultists there so that if your opponent does have a whole bunch of mortal wound output, you can be like, cool, everything's hidden behind a wall, so they can't do anything first turn. Then you just move and advance your Cultists up and then move your Terminators behind it. And then in their turn, they waste all their time smiting out Cultists, which they don't want to do. And then in your next turn, the Terminators move in, advance, charge, and blow stuff up. So using the Cultists smart is very important to the success of this list. The other interesting tech piece that I had in there was the bikes, that big 8-unit of bikes, 8-man unit of bikes with the black mace. Now the idea here is that he goes in and he's got Mark of Khorne, so he's hitting at strength 8, and because of Creations of Bile gives +1 strength, Mark of Khorne gives +1 strength, and then the black mace gives +2 strength, so he's strength 8. And basically he's going in with those 3 damage attacks that spill over the damage, so really, really powerful combat. And that whole unit's purpose is just to give me an ability to get specimens for the spider on the first turn. You're essentially paying a CP in 290 points to pretty much guarantee that you're going to get 2 victory points in the first turn, and then you sling that unit in, you advance and charge it using the Creations of Bile stratagem, you blow something small up, you don't try too hard to go for anything too big, because if you fail to kill it, then you've just lost 2 points. So you'll find a unit of tactical marines or a unit of cultists or a unit of gargoyles or whatever. You send them in, you blow that up, and that gets you 2 victory points. And then your opponent is almost certainly going to try and charge you and kill that unit of bikes, which means you're going to fight on death and you're going to kill something else. So they're a 2-use trick. And then basically, in order to protect yourself from shooting, you want to try to either charge something and kill it and then try to pin and consolidate into tag other stuff so they can't shoot you. Or if you can't do that, you want to try to do it from as far out of line of sight as possible as best you can. And then there's a 1 CP stratagem for any bike unit after it's advanced to become neg1 to hit in the shooting phase. So because you advanced and then charged, got all up in their deployment zone, when they turn their guns on you, you can go, cool, that bike unit is neg1 to hit. And now they're like, oh, fucking toughness 5 with 3 wounds and neg1 to hit. That's actually relatively hard to kill. With 3 up saves and Armor of Contempt, it's actually really annoying. So that's basically how that unit functions. That fills a very specific slot. And basically with that advance and charge, they can move 21 inches up the table and then charge something. So what I would often do is I would look at my opponent and go, okay, how many units do they have? How many units do I have? I would basically keep the bikes for my last drop. So I'd deploy Terminators, characters, all of that sort of stuff, wait for them to finish deploying their army, and then I'd go, cool, now I'm going to deploy the bikes. And I'd basically try to deploy them somewhere where they're relatively safe from first turn shooting, but mainly so that they're somewhere where they can get a turn 1 charge. So if they deployed anything along the line, or even close to the line, I would go, cool, that's where I need to put my bikes. And that way you're baiting your opponent into spending their whole deployment trying to deploy back because they don't know where your bikes are going to go. And then if they do backline really hard and you can't get that turn 1 charge, it's not the end of the world, because then you just move and advance behind a ruin somewhere in the middle, and now they have that same problem in their first turn. Do they come out and then just get charged by the bikes turn 2? Or do they stay back? And if they stay back, then your Terminators are moving up the field. You're getting your banners, you're controlling all the primaries, so they sort of can't. So if you do that, basically you can use the bikes to pressure your opponent into making those sorts of bad decisions. So the bike unit was really good. That being said, it is one of the things that I'm considering cutting, and we'll go through basically how it worked in every one of my games so that you get a bit of an understanding, and then we'll talk about at the end of the video some of the ideas that I have for ways to improve the list. So yeah, that's the bike unit. And then the other one is the Raptors, and their purpose was basically to give me an ability to raise even more banners early, because the Possessed have a 10-inch move, which allows them to access a lot of objectives depending on the deployment, but there are some objectives that are a bit further away. So having the Raptors in there with their 13-inch move, thanks to Creations of Bile, it allows you to basically go, cool, I'm going to raise this banner with my Cultists, I'm going to raise that banner with my Raptors, I'm going to raise that banner with Possessed, and I'm going to raise that banner with Possessed. And then I'm going to have a fuck ton of Terminators in the middle of the table. And my bikes are blowing up your backfield. And your opponent just goes, what the fuck? Like, it's so much. And basically, they're then busy trying to deal with all this other stuff, which then means you're advancing your Terminators aggressively. Abaddon's flying up there aggressively. Like, it's a very high-pressure army, and it's a very durable army. It plays very, very well, and I was really happy with it. So, yeah, that's more or less the list. If you want to see a detailed breakdown of all the stratagems that I use and things like that, check out my masterclass video on Creations of Bile, because in there I go through all the different warlord traits, I go through all of the different stuff, and I cover it off there. The one thing that I did forget there was the Demon Prince. Now, you're probably wondering why Mark of Tzeentch and why the warlord trait that I have. And the idea here is that he's my dedicated warp ritual guy, and he's also my dedicated anti-flyer guy. Because when you have an army that's predominantly combat-based, sometimes a couple of harpies can be a real fucking problem, you know? So the idea with the Demon Prince is in the matchups where I need him to kill flyers, I just play him super aggressively, and he can fly out into the open, kill a flyer, and then because his Mark of Zinj, he's actually quite tough to put down because he can put a 4-up invulnerable save on himself, and then he automatically reduces the damage of the first failed save to 0. So it actually takes quite a bit of bullets to put him down. And then even if you do put him down, at the end of your shooting phase, once you've done all your shooting, he just gets back up on a 2+. So, and then he's free to go and chase down the other flyers. So he was my answer to flyers, which was really effective in some games. And then in the games where I don't need him to kill flyers, he goes in and does Warp Ritual. And the idea was he moves up into the center of the table, he does his Warp Ritual, and then he warp times the Terminators that are behind him, and they come in front of him. So basically turn 1, you just make sure that you deploy him within 18 inches of the center. Because he's got the 13-inch move thanks to Creations of Bile, he would move his 13 inches, which means he's within 6 inches of the center, turn 1, and then you go, cool, roll your dice, you've got your Warp Ritual, and then because his Mark of Zinj, you have a stratagem that allows you to do a psychic action and cast 1 regular power. And I put warp time on him so that he's moved up his 13 inches. The Terminators have a 6-inch move, and then you advance them. So you advance them in behind him so that they end their move within 3 inches of him. And then he warp times them and slings them in front of him. And now he's safe from the next turn shooting. He's done his Warp Ritual. And those Terminators are very aggressively postured, so that if your opponent tries to come in and take the center off you, they're going to commit suicide. So he's then free to do a Warp Ritual again. And then basically in the second turn, he then jumps over, so that he's still within 6 inches of the center, but he's on the other side now. And then those Terminators move up, advance, warp time in front of him again. So now you're on the other side of the center of the table turn 2, and you've done Warp Ritual twice. And then basically in that third turn, you're able to either go, cool, I'm going to Warp Ritual with him again, or I'm going to send him off somewhere to blow something up, and then I'll do Warp Ritual with my Master of Possessions. So it all depends on the game state and where you're at. But yeah, the Demon Prince is really powerful for that. So while I really like other characters in the book, I like the Disco Lord, I like, there's a few Chaos Lord builds that are really powerful. The ability to be fast with the Demon Prince and be able to cast psychic powers and be sufficiently tough that if your opponent does get angles on you, they can't just easily kill your Demon Prince and now you can't get Warp Ritual anymore. It's actually very hard to kill him. So really powerful unit, really powerful combo there. Alrighty, let's get into round 1. Now basically the way that I'm going to format these rounds is I'm basically going to go through, now that we've gone through my list together, I'm going to go through my opponent's list with you, then I'm going to go through our scores, and then I'm going to talk about how those scores were achieved. Now, it's worth noting that I'm no expert on any of the factions that my opponents played. I know Chaos, that's pretty much it. So if I fuck up anything here, I apologize, and if you're a faction expert in any of these, please point out any mistakes that I make in the comments below so that anybody who's watching this video doesn't get the wrong idea, because I don't want to give people false information. So if I get anything wrong, chuck it in the comments below. I've done my best reading through their Battlescribe dump to summarize what these units have, but like I said, I'm not an expert on this stuff, so I'm going off a combination of memory, confusing Battlescribe information, trying to summarize it in a palatable way for you. So help me out in the comments below, I very much appreciate that. And with that being said, let's get into Chapter 3, Round 1, against Andrew Robinson and his Adepta Sororitas. Alright, let's run through Andrew's list. Now, I'm not going to go through too much detail. He basically had a Sister Superior, Repentia Superior, an Inquisitor, a Canoness, who was more or less just a beatstick, a Palatine, which was another beatstick character. Then he had 3 units of 10 Battle Sisters, with a Heavy Bolter in each and a Storm Bolter in each. He had a unit of 10 Sacrosants. He had 2 units of 3 Paragon Warsuits with Multi-Melters and Paragon Warblades. He had a Preacher who has a War Hymn. He had a unit of 9 Repentia. He had a unit of 5 Dominions with Storm Bolters. He had a unit of 10 Zephyrim, a unit of 3 Penitent Engines with Heavy Flamers and Buzzblades. He had a unit of 5 Retributors with 4 Multi-Melters, and he had a Rhino. So yeah, basically it was a bit of a mixed bag sisters list. He had a little bit of everything. He had some combat, he had some shooting, he had some, various elements that he had within the list. He had some stuff that was going to be fast, some stuff that was going to hold his backfield. Real mixed bag bloody rose list. So very interesting. He basically had the Repentia in the Rhino, and there was that, they have the potential to do that pre-game move and do damage there. So yeah, quite a threatening list. I was a little concerned going into it because one of my good friends plays sisters and he often beats me. That being said, Creations of Bile have a pretty good matchup into combat-based sisters because I always fight on death. So basically anything that they kill, I'm going to kill them. But anytime I kill them, they don't fight on death. So it was going to be a very interesting game was what I was thinking on the offset. However, if we look at the scores that came through, we can see that I got a 96. So I maxed out my primary throughout the game. I took Banners, Psychic Ritual, and Specimens of the Spider. So Banners I got a 14, Psychic Ritual I maxed out at 12, and then Specimens of the Spider I got a 15. So that comes to a total of 96. And he got a 22. So he only got 4 points for primary. He only got 2 points for Banner. He took Leap of Faith, which he scored 6 on, and then he took Sanctuary, which is another sister-specific one, which he scored 0 on. So yeah, the game ended up being quite a blowout in my favor, and basically what happened was I got the first turn, and I basically just moved everything up really aggressively. Everything advanced, everything moved up into the center of the table. My bikes went in and killed his Sacrosancts, those shield bitches. Killed them first turn. And then in his turn, when he charged a whole bunch of stuff into those bikes, when I fought on death, I just killed a whole bunch more stuff. The bikes are amazing into anything that's toughness 3 because a standard bike is going to be striking at strength 6 because they get +1 strength from Creations of Bile, +1 strength from Mark of Khorne. And with their chainswords, they go to AP 2 because they get AP 1 from the chainsword and then +1 AP from the icon in the Mark of Khorne unit. So everything that he threw at me just evaporated on the backswing. So that was a really, really powerful play. He did kill the bikes, but it took a lot of his stuff down with it. And then basically from there, it was just a matter of every time he tried to kill something, he died. So, for example, one of the turns I had a unit of 5 Possessed and Abaddon holding the objective that he dedicated to his Sanctuary. And basically for that one, if he holds it at the end of his turn, he gets 3 victory points. But if I hold it at the end of the game, he gets -3 victory points. So knowing that, I just pushed my whole army in the direction of that objective, and which meant Abaddon and the Possessed were on that objective turn 2. So he scored it on turn 1, but then I was on it from turn 2, and every time he threw something to try to take that objective back, it bounced. He'd throw something, kill the Possessed fight on death, kill him. Then he'd throw something in, and I'd heroically intervene with Abaddon, kill him. Every time he tried to put something on that objective, I was just pushing him back, which meant that I held it at the end of the game, giving him a -3, which cancelled out his first turn and gave him a 0. And then as for Banners, I basically held the center, held his one that he had, and then I also held the one on the other corner. So he basically only had one objective for the game. So yeah, basically he only held that one objective in his backfield. He raised a banner on it, but I pretty much pulled that banner straight down. And as a result, he just realistically didn't score anything. He didn't get any on he struggled to get primary because I kept blowing him off his backfield. It was a real blowout of a game. And I think it all sort of boiled down to the fact that when he threw everything into those bikes were able to kill just way too much, way too much. He should have instead moved his shooting elements and shot the bikes whilst moving his combat elsewhere. Throwing the combat into those bikes was a suicide run. So yeah, it was a great game. Andrew's a great guy, but unfortunately it was a blowout in my favor. Alrighty, Chapter 4, Round 2. Now this was a very interesting game because it was almost a mirror match. So it was basically a good friend of mine, Alex, he's running his Black Legion. So we had a Black Legion list led by Abaddon versus a Creations of Bile list led by Abaddon. So it was a bit of an Abaddon-off. Yeah, at the start, we both sort of looked at it and we thought that I had the list advantage because we were like, well, basically we're going to hit each other, but I'm going to fight on death, so I have an advantage there. However, I thoroughly underestimated the power of the Black Legion, and it's got to the point where even though I won the game, I'm now looking back at it thinking, well, maybe Black Legion is the better Legion because the fact that their Terminators get full reroll hits and wounds was fucking insane. The fact that he can, there was just so many things that he can do in that list that made it so powerful. Like Abaddon's Warlord trait allows him to pick an enemy unit, and he gets reroll wounds against it. So even on the turns when he's not using his reroll hits and wounds from Abaddon, he can pick a unit and then throw like his obliterators into it and get reroll. Like it was fucking crazy, right? So I'm definitely going to take another look at the Black Legion. However, we were right in the end, and I did come out on top. So let's go through his list together first, and then we'll go through the scores. So he had a Supreme Commander, Abaddon the Despoiler, big man. Then he also had a Demon Prince with Mark of Nurgle. He had Wings, and he had Golax the Decayed and Death Hex. He had a Dark Apostle, same loadout as mine, except he had the Mark of Slanesh and the Cloak of Conquest. He had a Master of Possessions, same as mine, Marcus Slanesh, Saliber Hereticus, Pact of Flesh, Mutated Invigoration. In his troops, he had 2 units of 10 Cultists. He had a unit of 5 Legionnaires with Chaos Undivided, Balefire Tomb, and Diabolical Strength. Then he had a unit of 10 Legionnaires with the Mark of Khorne and an Icon. He had 10 Terminators. His had 4 Combi Melters and 2 Power Fists in the unit, and he also had the Black Rune of Damnation. Then in his fast attack, he had a single Chaos Spawn. He had a unit of 5 Raptors, just like me. He had a Venom Crawler, and then he had 3 Obliterators. So yeah, it was a really interesting list. He had the same HQ choices as me. His Demon Prince was different, and his reasoning for taking that Demon Prince was that he thinks the Mark of Nurgle one's quite a bit tougher, and that Relic Axe that he has, the Golax or whatever it's called, it allows him to kill Abaddon in one swoop. It allows him to kill Phoenix Lords. It allows him to kill, those big tough units with Feel No Pain. So it's a really powerful thing. And then he also combines that with Death Hex on the Demon Prince. So that Demon Prince can go in and go, okay, cool, you got a unit of Custodians? Well, I'm going to Death Hex them, and then I'm going to charge them and fuck them up. If he Death Hexes Abaddon and then charges Abaddon, he just kills him. If he Death Hexes, even my unit of Terminators, I was worried that he was going to Death Hex the Terminators and then charge in and just go, cool, you get no Feel No Pains, and I'm just going to shred them. So yeah, really powerful tech choice there. I still think that my tech choice with the Mark of Tzeentch and the Twisted Regeneration is probably better. However, mine is exclusive to Creations of Bile. His Black Legion one, you can run in any Legion. So there's pros and cons there, I guess. One of the other main differences between our lists was that he had the Obliterators, and the Obliterators were really scary. Like, I had to spend a lot of my time making sure that my movement was either keeping out of their range or out of their line of sight, because I knew that one of the weaknesses of the Creations of Bile is getting shot. If they shoot me dead, I don't get any utility out of my Legion trait. So I wanted to be able to go, okay, cool, if you're going to kill me, you're going to do it in combat. All right, so before we go through too much more of the actual game and the way it played out, let's have a quick look at the scoreboard. So this was a really interesting game, and knowing that he has several Mark of Khorne units, and also he has the ability to, if he throws his Castle of Terminators into mine, he will actually kill mine because he gets full rerolls to hit and wound. I don't. So he was basically going to go in and kill mine, and then that exposes my Terminators, that exposes my characters, that exposes my Demon Prince. So I was like, I don't want to be taking Warp Ritual here because I think he's going to stop me from scoring it. So I intentionally took other secondaries, whereas he did take Warp Ritual. And then basically what happened is when his castle moved up, my castle moved up, he actually left a gap where my Demon Prince was able to go out and kill his Demon Prince. And then because I killed his Demon Prince, he was in the, I think I did that first turn, because I believe he went first and then moved up into the center of the table. So because I was able to kill his Demon Prince, he actually scored 0 for Warp Ritual, and then he basically just pivoted harder into all of his other secondaries. But knowing that information at the start of turn 1, I was then able to go, cool, I actually don't need to get a massive score. I don't need to play any risky moves here, because I know that one of his secondaries is getting a 0. And as long as I don't get a 0 in any of mine, then we should be golden. And basically we both sort of pivoted around the table like that, where turn 1 I sent my bikes up, killed some legionnaires, killed some cultists. He then threw his venom crawler and his obliterators in. And it was amazing because basically what it is, he fought with the venom crawler and killed a few bikers. They fought on death, and the black mace actually killed all 3 of his obliterators, which was really high rolling. Like, I rolled like an absolute fiend, because between I think it was the black mace guy and maybe 2 or 3 bikes, were able to kill the whole obliterator unit. And he rolled really poor on his saves as well. But basically once that happened in his turn 2, I was like, well, now the game's over. I've killed your demon prince and I've taken out your ranged shooting. So as long as I don't let your terminators just roll me up, then we should be fine. So yeah, basically he moved around this way and raised banners on those objectives. I moved around that way, raised banners on those ones. And basically we just stayed out of each other's way. And I just scored all of my secondaries, and unfortunately he didn't score all of his. So it was a really interesting game, and I'm pretty confident that if we played it again, he would have my number, because he would basically know either not to take Warp Ritual as a secondary, or to do a better job of protecting his Demon Prince from mine. So yeah, all in all, very interesting game, and I really enjoyed it. Alex is a great guy, so yeah, I look forward to deep diving the Black Legion to see if I can pull any insights out of that game and come up with some interesting combos and some interesting strategies for you guys to try out at home. All right, let's move on to round 3. Now, this was against Leviathan Tyranids. Now, this was the one game that I mentioned where the 2.5-hour battle rounds stung us. Because basically what happened is my opponent rocked up at the table, he brought his chess clock, and I'm like, yep, let's use the chess clock. And we basically were using that throughout the game, and then it was either at the end of his turn 2 or at the start of his turn 3. I can't remember exactly which, but basically he ran out of time. He zeroed out on his clock. So unfortunately, zeroing out that early in the game, we still had, I think, it was like 36 minutes left on the clock, but I still had 3 turns to get done. So I was like, basically I need 10 minutes a turn so that I can go and do all of my actions, because there's all these combats I need to resolve and there's all these psychic powers and blah, blah, blah. So unfortunately that meant he didn't get to play out his remainder of his game. I still did just saves and all those sorts of, the standard chess clock, death clock rules. But unfortunately that meant he wasn't able to bring forth the full might of his army to do the damage that he needed to do to win that game. So it's worth noting, and I don't want to harp on about it too much, but when you are playing on a chess clock, time management is actually a massively important skill. So things like, I have cultists in my army, I never shoot with them. They have guns, I never shoot with them. And when I charge something with them, I never actually resolve their fights, unless my opponent wants me to. Like if they're like, no, because I want you to kill that, But I more or less just go, cool, they're charging in, they do no damage, it's fine. Because they're not going to. Like if I'm charging a fucking rhino, like I'm not gonna fight your rhino with my cultists. It's a waste of everybody's time. So little decisions like that, knowing what you can get away with doing and what you can't, like what's worth investing the time in. And then also trying to package as many of your decisions together as possible. So for example, my psychic phase, I can resolve it in like 30 seconds because I'm just like, I know exactly what powers I cast and in what order I cast them and what they go off on. So I'm just like bang, 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 psychic phase done, right? Whereas if you don't have that plan before the game and you get to the table and then you're like, okay, oh fuck, it's my psychic phase. And you're like, okay, what powers do I have again? Oh, that's right, I've got these powers. What order do I want to do them in? What's the most important one to do first? Like if you're thinking all of that's all time that you're wasting. And if you've got like nice long 3-hour rounds, it's probably not that big of a problem. But when you come to the table and you know that it's only 2.5 hours, so you know that you're only getting an hour and 15. And then when you take out 15 minutes for things like explaining how your army works at the start of the game, meeting your opponent, shaking their hand, going through the deployment, defining terrain, all those sorts of things that can take up, decent amount of time. You might only have an hour to play the game. That's actually not very much time. So knowing that you've only got an hour, so you've got 60 minutes to try to get 5 turns, you got to be like, well, how am I going to get all my turns done in 10 minutes each? That's what you need to be sort of budgeting for. You can afford to spend a little bit more on the first turns because obviously your last turns are quite fast, but it's just important to be conscious of and aware of those things. But anyway, I don't want to harp on about that too much. I might do a future video where I'll break down the very specifics of chess clocks. If that's something you're interested in, let me know in the comments below. But with that being said, let's get into the list. So I'm not a huge Tyranid expert, so forgive me if any of this is wrong, but basically he's got 3 zone throbes that take up no force organization slot. Then he has a Hive Tyrant with a Shard Gullet, Catalyst, and Horror. He has a Neurothrope with Catalyst Onslaught and Synaptic Tendrils. Then he has 2 units of 3 warriors in his troop slots with 2 double bone swords and a venom cannon and 2 death spitters. His other troop slot is 10 gargoyles. Then he has 3 venom thropes in his elite slot, 3 biovores in his heavy support. He has 2 harpies. One of them's got Stranglethorn cannons and synaptic enhancement, and the other has venom cannons and dermic symbiosis. Then he's got a second detachment, which is a HQ with a Tervagon with adaptive biology. Another Hive Tyrant. This one has wings and the Reaper of Obliterax, Paroxysm, and Psychic Scream. And then a third warrior unit. This one's got 6 bodies in it. 2 with all of them with 2 bone swords. 2 of them have venom cannons and 4 with death spitters. So yeah, quite a powerful list. This has a lot of shooting, a lot of psychic, a lot of combat. It has movement where the harpies can do mortal wounds. So it's just doing damage all game. It's doing damage all the time. So this was kind of a scary list because I know that Psychic can be a problem for the Terminators. I know that the Reaper of Obliterax can be a problem for Abaddon. I know that the Harpies are hard for me to kill because I don't have a massive amount of shooting, so I've got to rely on my Demon Princes to do his damage in melee into that Harpies. I know that he has the capacity to put out more damage in multiple phases, so Abaddon's quite vulnerable because he could go, okay, cool, I'm going to fly 2 Harpies over Abaddon, put 2 bombs on him, then I'm going to Psychic him, then I'm going to shoot him, and then I'm going to charge him. He can do a lot of damage there. So there's lots of different ways that he can do that. So I was like, okay, I need to protect Abaddon. I need to protect my Demon Prince. I need to protect my Terminators. There's so many things that need to go right for this to work. So basically it all came down to making sure that I picked the right secondaries and that I played the game as fast as I could because I knew that time was a potential challenge. So I need to make sure that I've come to the game with a plan. Luckily, this was round 3. So there was a lunch break in between round 2 and 3. So there was probably about an hour that I was able to go, cool, I'm just going to read through his list and I'm going to come up with a plan. I'm going to think the plan through. And then it's just a matter of getting to the table and executing that plan. I don't want to have to be trying to think on the fly. Obviously, you need to be open-minded to change, but coming up with a plan before the game and then just sticking to it, sticking to your guns is really important. So let's go through the scoreboard, talk about the secondaries, and then we'll go through the game in a bit more detail. Now, if you want a little bit more information, you've probably seen that I've taken Banners and the Long War a couple of times. I actually did a deep dive video on these 2 secondaries, but the TLDR of it is that they actually pair quite well because if you take Banners and you move out aggressively and raise 3 banners, your opponent now has to get onto those objectives to take your banners down. And if they do that, they're then presenting you with the opportunity to score Long War because if you kill something that was holding an objective, you get 3 victory points. So the idea is basically they either have to stay back, stay away from the objectives, and then I score massive banners, or they have to come in, try to fight me off of the objectives, but then I'm scoring big Long War. So it was a very interesting interplay with those 2 secondary objectives, and it worked quite well. You'll never get 15 on both, but the idea here is that one of them you're going to get 15 and the other you're going to get a 9. So if you take the banners and they leave your banners alone, you're going to struggle to get Long War. You're probably only going to get around 9 points, but you're going to get 15 for banners. Whereas if they do come in, they're going to take down a bunch of your banners, and you're probably only going to get 9 for banners, but then you're going to be getting 15 for Long War because you're going to spend the whole game just killing them off of objectives that they hold. So these 2 secondaries pair really well together, and there's a ton more examples of ways this works. So if you want to check that out, check out my deep dive on the Long War and the banners combo. But yeah, basically I took that into a lot of people, and in this game, I went first and the bikes just shot up the table and killed his unit of gargoyles that were holding an objective. So that's 3 points for Long War, and it's also 2 points for specimens for the spider because I killed a unit. And then I basically piled in and wrapped his Tervagon so that he couldn't fall back. And now that means he can't shoot those bikes, so he has to do smite damage to them, but he's not really going to be doing enough smite damage to kill them all. So he's going to have to charge them, and then the idea was that I'd get to fight on death and do damage in his turn as well. And that worked quite well. The Black Mace guy, in between fighting when I charged him and fighting again when he killed me, he did, I think, 10 wounds to the Tervagon, so he took a big chunk out of it. And then, yeah, obliterated everything else that was in that combat. So that was really powerful, that was really good. So that was my first turn, and then basically I moved up into the center, moving the cultists out in front of the Terminators, so that then in his turn, when he goes to smite the Terminators, he has to smite cultists. And then the next turn, I was basically planning on doing this big multi-charge with the Terminators, now that I could, try and tag his psychic damage and kill them, send everything in. He, in his first turn, he flew his Harpies down and dropped some bombs on cultists and stuff in the backfield, which wasn't enough to kill the units. Then in his next turn, he flew over, dropped more bombs, and then in my third turn, the Demon Prince was able to turn around and kill Harpies. And this is why I didn't take Psychic Interrogation in this game. Normally, Psychic Interrogation is really good, but I didn't want him to either use his abilities to deny me, or basically hem the Demon Prince into securing that one objective. I wanted the Demon Prince to be my assassin. He needed to be going out and killing things. And the idea here is because, like I said earlier, he can fly out and kill a Harpy, and then if my opponent tries to shoot him and kill him, I can just get back up at the end of the phase, and then when the Harpy flies away, I can chase it down, or I can jump back into my protection. So there's a few different ways that you can run that Demon Prince. He's really good at bringing down things like Harpies and other flyers. So yeah, that's what the Demon Prince and the Harpies were doing. Meanwhile, we had this combat happening in the middle of the table, and then that's basically when my opponent ran out of time. So he had a lot of stuff that was about to come in, and he was about to do some serious damage. And realistically, him running out of time, it actually didn't impact his score as severely as you might think, because he still was scoring his primary, because he held those back two objectives. He had banners on them, so he was still scoring his banners. I think, oh, that's right, the other secondary that he took was mental interrogation. So he was trying to use his psychers to interrogate mine. However, because I have the Khorne units, I was able to deny it on a 4+. And I also think I got a couple of natural denies there as well with my characters. So unfortunately, he wasn't able to score very highly in his mental interrogation, which meant that ultimately I ended up scoring higher than him. Even if he went in and killed everything, I still would have scored higher because I picked better secondaries. So it was a really interesting game, and I wish we could have played it to conclusion. I think it was going to be very interesting, and it was definitely going to be a lot closer than the scoreboard here represents. But realistically, I was getting maximum primary because he had, once I'd killed, his Harpies can't contest my backfield objectives, and I had cultists hiding on a backfield objective. He's never going to get down there because he's too busy dealing with my Terminators and my characters and my Possessed and all the Berserkers and everything that's up there. He doesn't have time to go down there and kill those cultists. So I'm scoring my backfield objectives, so I'm going to max primary regardless. And because I'm also contesting that central objective, so we're basically taking turns of holding that. So I'm going to get max primary, and then I scored really high on all three of my secondaries. So unfortunately, he didn't have a massive amount of play in terms of secondaries. So yeah, that's what it came down to. And I find often that is what games come down to. And this was one of my challenges with the Chaos Space Marine Codex when it first came out. I was a little concerned because I didn't feel like the secondaries were very strong. However, stumbling onto this combination of Long War and Banners, which plugged and played really nice into a lot of matchups, whilst also specifically teching for that psychic ritual where you're going to go into the center of the table and you're going to cast your power and then you're going to protect yourself. That's just a very strong baseline that you can pick. And then obviously if you verse something like Knights, you go, cool, well, I'm just going to, instead of Specimens for the Spider, I'm going to take Bring It Down, You can sort of change it up a little bit, or you might go, okay, well in this one, instead of taking Long War, I'm going to take Specimens for the Spider because they don't have a lot of units, they're not going to be on objectives often, so I'm going to have to go with a different route. So Creations of Bile actually have a really interesting suite of secondaries, so I really liked it, and I think I will continue to play Creations of Bile. I just need to fine-tune the list a little bit further and play with some different elements and see what we can cook up. Alrighty, day 2, round 4, I was up against Ben's Blood Angels. Now, this was a matchup that I was desperately hoping for, because the last time I played Blood Angels was a good friend of mine, Sam, and I got like 0 victory points. This was back when I was running the Emperor's Children in the previous codex. He was running the Sangard and all the same sort of stuff that people are running now, only nowadays they have a lot more of it. So it was going to be an interesting game, and I was a little concerned going into it because I was just like, he's got so many 2-up saves with Armor of Contempt, and like Possessed are only AP 2, so it's like, yeah, sure, I get to fight on death, but he's probably just going to shrug it all off on saves, you know? And knowing how aggressive he can be, he had a unit of Death Company he can throw in, he can do all this sort of stuff, I was a little bit concerned. So let's go through his list, and we'll take it from there. So we had a HQ who was a chaplain with a jump pack, Master of Sanctity, Wise Orator, and an Icon of the Angel. He had a Sanguinary Priest with a Chief Apothecary, Jump Pack, and a Selfless Healer. He had 2 units of 5 Assault Intercessors in his troops, and a unit of 5 Incursors. Then he had a unit of 5 Death Company, 4 of which had Hammers. He had a Sanguinary Ancient with the Wrath of Bile. He had 3 units of 6 Sanguinary Guard with swords. He had a unit of 10 Vanguard Veterans that had 4 Hammers, 4 Lightning Claws, a couple of Storm Shields, and Quake Bolts. Then he had Fast Attack, 2 units of 5 Assault Marines, and heavy support was a Whirlwind with the Castellan Launcher. Alright, so now we've gone through his list. Now, it was a very interesting game. There was going to be combat on combat, so let's go through the scoreboard, look at who got what, and then we'll break down the game in a little bit more detail. So for primary, I got a 45 again. For banners, I scored a maximum of 15. I got 12 for my Warp Ritual, and I also scored a maximum of 15 for Specimens of the Spider. So it gave me a total score of 97. Now for him, he got a 35 for his primary, he got 10 for his banners, and then he took Descent of Angels, which is a really interesting Blood Angels secondary, where if they kill something with a unit that arrived from Deep Strike earlier in the game, they get 4 points. And then he took Relentless Assault, which is basically have more of his units in my deployment zone than my units are in his deployment zone. So he got a total score of 71, so it was a relatively close game compared to some of my previous rounds. And yeah, so basically this game, we both scored quite high because we both spent a lot of time just dodging each other. So he deployed relatively conservatively, and then he won the roll-off to go first. And because I also deployed conservatively, using some of the tricks that I explained when discussing my army list, where you wrap cultists around Terminators so that they can't be charged, and you deploy that out of line of sight so they can't be shot, which means things like his Death Company that are normally this really big ace up his sleeve are actually kind of neutered and do nothing into my list if it's deployed correctly. So yeah, basically he knowing that I had just done that, and I explained to them that this is my intent, that this is going to be make it so you can't charge, and he's like, okay, cool. So he just deployed somewhere in his backfield, and then he won the roll to go first. So all he did was literally move a unit of Intercessors a little bit further back so that my bikes, when they go in for the charge, were going to be looking for a 10-inch charge. And then he basically positioned around so that he was threatening me for follow-up turns. Then in my turn, the bikes went in, and then they just made the 10-inch charge. It did cost me a CP to re-roll it, and re-rolling a 10-inch charge, you might think, Dean, you're a fucking madman, but I just knew that if I did get that charge, it was going to be like game-winning, because it was going to get me 2 points for Specimens, it was going to get me on his objective, which would then mean he would have to come in and try to kill me, which would then mean he's put models on an objective, which would then mean I could go in and get more victory points that way and basically keep trading and keep pushing him off that objective, which would mean we'd have a fight on one of his backfield objectives. I would hold the center, and I would hold both of my backfield. And if I could do that, I'm basically boxing him into one corner, which is not where the Blood Angels want to be. So I re-rolled it and made it, went in, killed the unit of Intercessors, and then I used my first turn to basically push out all my bubbles. So I had cultists stringing out. Now that they didn't need to protect the Terminators, they basically advanced out and created a bit of a flower, and then moved Abaddon up the other side, knowing that Abaddon's not going to die in this game because he can't take more than 3 wounds outside of one phase, and the Blood Angels do almost all of their damage in one phase. It's going to take him 3 entire turns to kill me. So I just sort of threw Abaddon up on his own. So he went up on one flank, and the Terminators went up the other. And then basically that funneled him into Abaddon, and then Abaddon just fucking shredded things. He was an absolute weapon in this game. And then, yeah, basically pivoting around like that was really powerful. I got my Warp Ritual just easily. There was nothing he could do because he had no ability to deny me. So I was just like, yep, cool, I'm just going to cast that. I actually cast that with the Demon Prince the first 2 turns. And this was like I said earlier in the video, where basically the Demon Prince turn 1, you deploy him 18 inches from the center. He moves up, casts his Warp Ritual, and then in his next turn he moves over, casts it again, and then goes in and charges. And by then, the Master of Possessions is up in the center of the table, and your opponent's often got a lot of damage taken, so you don't necessarily need to protect those Terminators as much. So at that point, the Master of Possessions, he did my 3rd Warp Ritual, while the Demon Prince went and assassinated characters. Because the tricky thing with that matchup is I actually don't want to kill too many things with Abaddon, because if Abaddon kills something, it's not points for specimens. So I had to make sure that Abaddon was killing something in the same turn that I was killing something with something else, so that I still got those 2 points for specimens. So I was actually really worried that he was just going to like suicide his characters into Abaddon, just charge into Abaddon and kill themselves, and then I get no points. And that would have been a really big problem. And had he done that, he might have actually, shortened the gap between our scores. There was also some points in there where basically I'd strung out in my first turn. He dropped a few units down to try to get some charges so that he would get in my deployment zone, which he needs for Relentless Assault. But he dropped 2 units down and failed both charges, even though he rerolled both charges. So that was a big swing, because then I was able to kill those 2 units that just dropped down, which one of them was like a unit of 5 Assault Marines, so the Terminators killed them, and then Abaddon killed the unit of Sengard. So I've got my 2 points for specimens there, and Abaddon's now even further up the table, and then everything pushes out further forward. So now it's like, well, now he can't even really drop to get into my deployment zone, which is something that he needs to be doing in order to get his Relentless Assault. So it just became a real blowout because he was so far back. Whereas had he played more aggressively, maybe that could have changed the outcome. All right, now we're onto the top table game, which is against a good friend of mine, Michael Hamilton. And this was an absolute sick game. It's actually really interesting because Michael was running a really off-meta Iron Hands list, and it's something that you don't see a lot of, and he was able to catch a lot of people off guard. He was doing a lot of tricks that were actually exposing people, and it was really interesting. And because we're good friends, I was actually talking to him earlier in the day, and he was telling me all this stuff that he was doing, and I was like, why? Why aren't your opponents stopping you from doing these things? This is all they need to do to stop you. So then when we got paired in the last round, I've just given him this cheeky smile, like, I know exactly what you're going to try to do, and I'm not going to let you do it. So I'll go through his list, then we'll go through the scoreboard, and I'll explain what these tricks are that he was doing, and I'll explain how I stopped them. So his list was a Primaris Chaplain on bike with the Master of Sanctity and the Imperium Sword. Then he had a Primaris Lieutenant and a Primaris Tech Marine. Then in his troop slots, he had 5 Assault Intercessors, 5 Incursors, 5 Tactical Marines. He had 3 Redemptor Dreadnoughts, 1 of them with the Gatling Cannon, 2 of them with the Plasma. Then he had a unit of 5 Relic Terminators with Combi Bolter and Lightning Claw. 2 units of Devastators, 1 of them with 4 Grav Cannons, 1 of them with 4 Multi-Melters. And then he had a Heavy Support Gladiator Reaper, and then Dedicated Transport for 2 Drop Pods. Now this was a really, really interesting list. And basically one of the Iron Hand specific secondaries is he gets victory points if he has a vehicle in your deployment zone. Then one of his other secondaries is behind enemy lines he would often take. So basically he would turn 1, drop the drop pod in with the Devastators, disembark out 2 units. That's 4 points for behind enemy lines. He'd blow a whole bunch of stuff up, and it's also another point for the Iron Hand specific secondary. Then he's assuming you're going to kill all of that in your turn. Then in his second turn, he drops the next pod down, disembarks out the 5 Tactical Marines, and that's another bunch of points. And what he would do is he would drop the Devastator pod out, they would disembark, and then he would use retrieve Nephilim data on one of them, but spend the CP so that they could shoot as well. So they would still do their maximum damage, but he's rotted a quarter, he's got behind enemy lines in a quarter, and he's got the Iron Hand specific one. Then in the next turn, he would drop the second pod so that it's in your deployment zone, but he would disembark the Tactical Marines into the outside of your deployment zone, and then he'd rod that quarter. So he was basically doing multiple different secondaries, very elegantly wrapped up in one single play. So very powerful. However, I was like, I'm just going to screen out my backfield with cultists that you can't hit, and they're fucking ages away from you, so you're not going to get that. So that was my sort of thoughts going into it. But I did actually change my mind, and there's a really interesting play here. So let's go through the scoreboard, and then I'll explain what I did that was actually surprising even to myself. I was like, oh, fuck, I wouldn't have thought that I was going to do this until the second I did it. So let's go through the scoreboard together. All right, so for primary, I got 45. I took Raise the Banners, Warp Ritual, and Specimens for the Spider. So Banners, I got 15, Warp Ritual 12, and Specimens, I got a 15. So that gave me a 97. However, he got a massive 94. So he got a 45 primary, he got 12 for retrieve Nephilim data, he got 15 for behind enemy lines, he got 12 for Cold Fury, which is the Iron Hand specific one, giving him a 94. Now basically this was actually really, really interesting, and it was quite a cerebral game. There wasn't a massive amount of damage dealt because I had the unkillable Terminator unit, which I was able to move up into cover in the center of the table whilst holding the central objective. So basically anything that he shot at me just bounced off, and he knew that if he engaged me in combat, he wasn't going to kill me, and then I was going to eviscerate him because Abaddon was right there, my Demon Prince was right there. He knew if he came in, he was fucked. So he stayed back more or less, and that was really interesting. However, what I had originally planned to do, which I thought was just going to absolutely shut him down, was just use my cultists to screen out my backfield. But then I realized his army's majority vehicles, which means Specimens for the Spider is actually kind of hard to get. So what I actually did is I left a hole behind my army that he could put his drop pod in, and I was like, oh no, I left a hole. So he puts his drop pod in there, disembarks out his 2 units. They killed like berserkers and some cultists, which I didn't really care about, because then I was able to go, cool. Now, in my first turn, I'm going to have Possessed are going to go in, and they're going to kill one of those units. And then my cultists are going to go in. They're going to tag that same unit that the Possessed just killed. They're going to charge that. But then they're going to use their consolidation move to pin the other unit of Devastators, so that they can't shoot me in his turn. Then in my next turn, they're going to fall back, and the Possessed are going to hit those other unit of Devastators. So it basically meant that I was getting 2 turns of Specimens for the Spider for free, and all I had to do was give him some victory points. So it was it was an interesting trade-off. And if this was a game of differentials, I might not have done it. But I knew that my ability to get Specimens of the Spider kind of relied on him being able to do his objectives, because if I stop him, I'm stopping myself. So it was really interesting, like trying to work out, well, is it better for me to stop him, or is it better for me to let him get his points so that I can get my points? It was really interesting. The other thing that's worth noting here is that I took Psychic Ritual, even though he has an ability to deny me on a 4+. Now, the reason that I did this, and I actually think this was a really interesting play, was in order to get maximum on that, which is 12, you only need to do it 3 times, right? But you're going to have 5 opportunities because your Demon Prince is fast enough that he can get up there early. So I did the maths and I was like, well, if he tries to deny me those 5 times, he's going to deny me 2.5 times, which means there's actually a reasonable expectation that I might still get it 3 times, even if he spends CP to try to deny me every single time. And basically, that means he's going to spend 5 command points over the course of the game, and I'm probably still going to get it. I'm still going to max it. So it's actually almost a trap trying to spend CP to deny somebody their Psychic Ritual. So I think the philosophy here is try to deny it their first time, but if you fail and they get it off, then abandon it. Let them have it for the rest of the game, because now they're going to have 4 more attempts and you need to stop 3 of them. So that's not going to happen. So basically, if you try to deny their first one, and if you fail to deny it, then let them have it for the rest of the game. However, Michael, he doubled down. He failed to deny me on the first turn, failed to deny me on the second turn, failed to deny me on the third turn, so now I've maxed it, and he spent his 3 CP, wasted them, and then my Demon Prince was able to just go in and murder things. So yeah, that was a risky play by me, because I mean, theoretically, he could have just denied me, and I get no points. And I'd be like, well, fuck. Or he could have, denied me a couple of times and then killed me somehow, But I thought it was worth it, and it definitely paid off in this game because he basically was wasting all of his CP, which he needed to be doing damage. He needed it to be able to advance. He needed to pass saving throws. He needed it to do all these shooting and doing an action at the same time. All of that sort of stuff he wasn't able to do because he was funneling all of his CP into trying to deny my psychic ritual. And then also what was really interesting was basically I held that central objective, and he had his drop pods behind me, which I was just sort of pick feeding. I was, taking them apart piece by piece. And then he kept throwing things into the central objective to try to deny me my maximum primary. But that was just giving me more units to kill, which was allowing me to max specimens. Whereas if he had kept all of his infantry back and just thrown dreadnoughts at me, the dreadnoughts would have been doing some damage. He would have been getting into the center of the table, which is one of the things he needs for Cold Fury. He would have been killing cultists or possessed or berserkers or whatever with those, which would have been getting him points for Cold Fury. And he would have been getting points, but I wouldn't have been getting my specimens points, which is an interesting way of looking at it. Instead of focusing specifically on how can you get your points, think about, well, how can I stop them from getting their points? And the only time that you do this is if it's not a differential style tournament where basically you just need to make sure that you get as many points as you can. In which case, it's probably okay to let them get points if it means you're getting points. You just don't want to let them get 3 points so that you get 2. You want to make sure that that trade, if it's going to happen, happens in your favor. And yeah, so it was a very interesting game, and it was very cerebral. It was very chill as well. It was a really good way to sort of ride out the event, because we were probably the first table finished, because there was often only one combat happening and almost no shooting, because he was basically just not bothering to shoot the Terminators. After the first turn, when he shot all the Terminators and didn't even kill one, he was just like, fuck this, I'm not even going to bother shooting them anymore. So he'd look at it and be like, okay, cool, the only thing of yours that's visible is that one unit of cultists. I'm going to shoot my entire army at it. And I'd just be like, yep, cool, they're dead. Don't even need to roll it, as if you're not going to kill 10 cultists with fucking 1 billion plasma guns. So it was really, really fast because we were basically just playing the strategy, and we didn't really need to rely on luck that much. The only thing that really mattered was rolling my psychic powers. That was important, and rolling his ability to deny my psychic powers, like my rituals and stuff. And then there was a few combats where it was 5 possessed into 5 devastators. We roll that out because it's possible that they don't kill it, even though it's 5 attacks per possessed that are strength 6, 2 damage. So very likely to kill the fucking devastators. But we rolled those sorts of things out. But yeah, basically it just ended up being a really, really fast game where we basically played the strategy and I came out on top. But it was very, very close. And at any stage, if one of those things had gone slightly his way, it could have been very differently. So yeah, there you have it, guys. That's a breakdown of how I went undefeated with Creations of Bile at the Risky Rollers Grand Tournament. So a breakdown of my list, breakdown of my games. Now let's talk about a few of the things that I'm thinking of changing in the list going forward. And I would really like to hear your opinions on this, because I value your feedback and it often helps me develop the lists further. So don't be afraid to jump into the comments below and give your opinion on this. But one of the things I'm thinking of dropping is potentially dropping the bikes. Now, the bikes were really, really good in the Sisters game. They were really, really good in the Chaos Space Marine mirror match. They were pretty good in the Tyrannid game. They were pretty good in the Blood. They were pretty good in every match, right? The problem is they are a 290 point unit it can be quite vulnerable. So it's difficult to wield, and it can be quite vulnerable. And if somebody's able to circumvent it and kill it early, then it's a lot of investment wasted. So because the Terminator unit is quite large, especially when you've got all the characters in the middle, it becomes quite a big unit. You're not going to have somewhere to hide the bikes in your deployment zone. And because they're bikes, they can't just run through walls. They're hard to maneuver. So often what I was doing was deploying them in the open with a fucking line straight to whatever their charge is, and then just going, cool, if I get first turn, that unit's fucked. But if you get first turn, my bikes are fucked. Luckily, a few of the games where I didn't go first were the few games where my opponent was combat heavy, like the Sisters list and the Blood Angels list, where a lot of their damage, and the Space Marine list for that matter, the Chaos Space Marine list. So luckily, it didn't really impact me. However, every single time I went to roll first, there was that anxiety where I was like, fuck, if I don't get first, he's going to kill my bikes, which means I'm not going to be able to get a specimens turn 1. And it also means I'm going to have almost nothing in my list that's able to threaten his backfield for a couple of turns, you know? Like it's going to take multiple turns before I'm able to get down there. So there's a few different things that I'm considering. One of them is actually Helldrakes. So Helldrakes, they can't control objectives, which means that they're not as good for pairing with things like Long War, but the Helldrakes can get down there very reliably, and they shoot something with the Bale Flamer and then charge it to finish it off. And because they're killing it in combat with their claws, you soften it with the Bale Flamer, you charge it, you kill it, and that way it's very reliable specimens points, and they're also quite a bit tougher than the bikes, and they're also cheaper than the bikes, and they also don't need a relic. They don't need the black mace like the bikes do. So there's a few reasons that the Helldrakes are actually a really interesting alternative for that, because the only other real way that you have of projecting damage is with shooting, and in Creations of Bile list, you don't want to be killing things with shooting because then you're not getting your points. And the only other thing that I can think of that can actually get that far down the table and hurt things are the bikes. So I'm going to experiment a little bit with Helldrakes. I think that's an interesting one there. The Berserkers, they're fucking immediately out of the list. They're garbage. And I think I'll be either replacing them with a unit of Legionnaires, or maybe some Warp Talons could be interesting, or something like that. I don't know how that will all come out of the wash. We'll have to see, because I also want to try to fit in more cultists. So it might be a matter of pulling out the Berserkers, putting in a unit of 5 Legionnaires, maybe without the Mark of Khorne. Maybe the Legionnaires take the Balefire Tome, and then that gives me access to more psychic powers. And then using some of those points that are freed up from the Helldrake, the points you save there, and the points I save on the Berserkers, to put in a few more units of cultists, something like that. I'd like to experiment with the Nurgle Demon Prince, because he's really good and depends on your meta. He's quite valuable. The other thing that I'm actually considering is dropping Abaddon. Now, Abaddon is an absolute murder machine. He's really powerful and he's really durable and he's just fucking really good. So it's really hard to not take him. However, he is a liability in a Creations of Bile list, because if your opponent is really switched on, they can just suicide units into him, and that's going to stop you from getting Specimens of the Spider. So that can be a huge problem for the list. So if you take Abaddon and you go up against somebody who really knows what they're doing, you might actually have to play with him in a way where you're limiting yourself intentionally. And realistically, if you're limiting yourself intentionally, why is he there? Like, maybe he would have been better off being an aggressive Disco Lord, you know? Still able to be hidden, still hyper durable, still high damage, but he actually pairs with the Creations of Bile. He actually does the Creations of Bile secondary. He actually gets to fight on death. He actually gets all of these bonuses. So it might be a simple matter of swapping Abaddon out for a Disco Lord. And the good thing about the Disco Lord as well is he can use his ability to get +1 to hit on the melee attacks from the Helldrake. So now that Helldrake, when it does go in turn 1 and do that damage, it's more reliable. So I think that could be an interesting combo and an interesting direction to take the list. The other thing that is also undeniably interesting is a Lord of Skulls. Because a Lord of Skulls in Creations of Bile list is such a fucking meme, because when it dies, it fights as if it's on its lowest bracket, which means it goes in with fucking shitloads of attacks that are really powerful. So the Lord of Skulls is an interesting play as well. However, I think that's a bit more of a meme than it is an actual competitive viable option, because I think it's a slow enough unit that people are they're gonna kite around it, they're gonna hide from it, and it's not impossible to kill. So if your opponent goes, cool, that needs to die this turn, you know, they can put it down. Or if it's going to take them 2 turns to kill it, which it often will, it's slow enough that they can actually just stay away and just shoot it for a couple of turns and it dies. And by doing that, you're actually giving them a valid target. Whereas if you don't, if you've got a Lord Discordant, you know, and a couple of Helldrakes, well, you throw the Helldrake out, and now that Helldrake, you can make it -1 damage, so it's tough. And the only other valid target is Terminators, and they don't want to do that either. So that could be one direction that we could take the list. Another direction is bumping up those Possessed. So maybe adding a 3rd Possessed squad, or fleshing out the squads to be a little bit bigger. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the maths and find out what the exact breakpoint is for how many Possessed do you need to reliably kill 5 Marines. because that's all you need. You don't need to kill much more than that. A lot of people are running small units of either Marines, Marine equivalent, or things weaker than Marines. So I think killing 5 Marines is a good benchmark for a unit. If it can do that, it's a useful unit. And there was a few times there, like when in that top table game, when I charged the 5 possessed into the 5 devastators, and I literally just killed them, like to the wound. If he passed one more save, I would have been fucked. So yeah, interesting little decision that I need to go down that route and see whether or not it's worth taking bigger units possessed. Maybe instead of 2 units of 5, it's 1 unit of like 7 or 8, and I can use those points elsewhere. So there's still going to be a few iterations of the list, so keep an eye on this channel and I'll keep you guys updated with any of the changes that I make. And we'll do it together, and maybe I'll do a couple of battle reports testing out a few different ideas. So let me know if that's something that you'd be interested in. The battle reports that I do won't be of the same quality as some of the other channels because I just don't have the production value, I don't have the equipment, I don't have the time for editing, and all of those things you can help out on Patreon. So if you want to head over to Patreon, I didn't mean to put a plug in here, but I'm going to because it came up, is any money that comes through Patreon is just used to improve this channel. I'm not using it on hookers and cocaine, I'm using it on, I'm not using all of it on that, I'm using it on increasing the quality of the content that I put out for you guys. That's all it is. So if you want this stuff to get better, that's in your hands. That's definitely something that you have the ability to do. So yeah, please make sure you do that. And yeah, I'm not going to go on for too long. So let's just jump straight into the next chapter with the awards ceremony.
Going in third with $200 cash for this one.
Yeah.
Is with 442 battle points.
With how many wins have you lost?
With 4 wins and 1 loss.
Yes, nice.
Jason Horn.
Congrats, bro.
Congrats, mate.
Congrats, man.
Thanks for the
Well played. Thanks for coming.
Don't forget your money. I mean, you don't have to.
did last time.
Coming in second place, also with 4 wins and a loss, with 461 battle points, was Michael Hamilton. Well,
Yeah.
well done.
Well done, bro. Well done, bro. Thank you very much. Congrats.
And first place with undefeated 5 wins and 477 battle points, Dean Sinbeck.
Yeah.
Is anyone going to be offended if I snap this Aquila off?
I won't be.
A round of applause for our TOs. Thank you very much. Great job. Thank you to all of my opponents. I had 5 fantastic games. You're a bunch of mad lads.
Fuck you.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Alrighty, that rounds out the video, and the last thing that I'm going to do is have a bit of a slideshow going of some of the beautiful armies that were on presentation at this event. There was some really cool stuff, and the TOs did a separate painting competition, so you were able to bring in models that weren't part of your army and enter them in a painting competition, which is really cool because sometimes the meta lists and the meta units that you want to play with aren't the prettiest models in your collection. So giving players the opportunity to bring in models that are not part of their army but are part of their collection, display them, is really cool. So I want to, show my respect and have that slideshow going towards the end of the video. So yeah, enjoy the slideshow, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Cheers. Do your objective markers ever get lost behind terrain or other models and become difficult to see? Do they ever get bumped and accidentally moved during a game? And do they ever spark arguments about distances? Well, not anymore. Introducing the blog for the Blood God, not even remotely patented Neoprene objective markers. Made from the same material as astronaut suits, or maybe military equipment, or probably neither of those things, this 2mm thick neoprene synthetic rubber is tear resistant, water resistant, and is designed to last. But that's not all. The blog for the Blood God, not even remotely patented neoprene objective markers come in a variety of different designs and styles to suit any faction represented in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. These objective markers are a perfect gift for yourself or a friend, and are a perfect way to flex and show your opponent that not only are you a smarter, cooler, and better 40k player than them, but you also have more disposable income than they do. For the low price of $25, you'll get not one, not two, but 6 neoprene objective markers, perfectly designed for 9th edition Warhammer 40k. But wait, there's more. For a limited time only, people who sign up on Patreon to support Blog for the Blood God as a Skull Champion tier $5 per month member will gain access to a custom design service where I will design a unique logo to support their gaming club, like the one I did to the left here for the Potato Farmers local gaming club here in Melbourne. Follow the links in the description of this video to pick up your set today. Alrighty, so Alex got a 78. He scored 40 points for primary. He took banners, warp ritual, and the long war. He scored 15 for his banners. He got 0 for warp ritual, and he got 13 for the long war. Plus his 10 points for battle ready gives him a 78. Whereas I got a 93. I maxed out my primary with 45. I got 14 points for banners. I took long war and specimens of the spider as well. Long war I got 9, and specimens I got 15. So plus the 10 battle ready gives me a total of 93. Okay, Jason got a 61 all up. So for his primary, he got 28 points. He got 6 points for raising the banners, 6 points for psychic interrogation, and 11 points for no prisoners. Plus his battle ready of 10 points gave him a total of 61. Whereas I got a total of 94. 45 points of those were primary. I took banners, long war, and specimens for the spider. Banners I got a 15 points on. Long war I got 9. Specimens for the spider I got 15. And battle ready I got a further 10 points, giving me that 94 total.